I met Elijah on a Wednesday. It was raining, not the soft, storybook kind, but a real, pounding storm that made people curse the sky and pull their coats tighter. I was standing outside Harlow's cafe, fumbling with a broken umbrella and an armful of sketchbooks. The wind had knocked my hair into my mouth, and my mood was somewhere between leave me alone and don't look at me. That's when he appeared. "I think your umbrella's having a panic attack," he said, shielding me with his own. His voice was calm. Warm. I remember blinking up at him, this tall guy in a worn black hoodie, hair damp and curling at the ends, like he belonged in the rain. He smiled like he'd been waiting to. That moment, right there on the sidewalk, soaked and irritated, I laughed. The kind that slips out before you realize you're not supposed to enjoy yourself. That's how it began. Nothing scripted. Nothing perfect. He was an architectural designer. I was a freelance illustrator who taught kids art on weekends. Our lives weren't glittering or glamorous, just real. His world was measured in clean lines and steel symmetry. Mine was smudged with charcoal, half-finished ideas, and coffee rings on every flat surface. We had absolutely nothing in common, except for the way we saw each other. On our third date, we walked the High Line at dusk. The city pulsed beneath us like it had a heartbeat of its own, and he told me his mom died when he was 21. Cancer. The quiet kind. She held on longer than they said she would, he murmured, fingers twitching near mine but not reaching. But it wasn't enough. It never is. I reached over, laced my fingers through his. "I'm here," I whispered. He just nodded, and in that silence, something passed between us. He let me see him. After that, we started moving like we were in rhythm. He brought me morning bagels with notes tucked inside. I painted a mural on the wall of his studio, a swirling galaxy of deep blues and amber light that he said reminded him of how I looked when I laughed. We didn't need grand gestures. Our love was built on quiet moments, slow dancing to an old record in my apartment while soup bubbled on the stove, sharing our weirdest dreams at 3 a.m., brushing our teeth side by side and arguing over which way the toilet paper roll should face. But it was the little vulnerabilities that made it real. One night, after a long day, I confessed, "Sometimes I don't think I'm good enough. Like I'm a backup character in someone else's story." He turned to me, serious. "You're the main character. You just don't see it yet." God, I loved him in that moment. Not because he said the right thing, but because he meant it. There was a safety in him. A grounding. Like if I ever fell too far, he'd catch me without question. And so, I let myself fall. Slowly, deeply, without restraint. I remember thinking, this is it. The kind of love they write about, but never get quite right. His hands fit mine like they belonged there. His laugh made everything feel lighter. His presence made the world less terrifying. We didn't know it then, but we were standing on the edge of something much bigger than either of us. We didn't know how far we'd fall. Or how much it would cost. But that first chapter. It was beautiful. It started with the light behind my eyes. That's how Elijah described it one night, weeks before we even knew what was happening. "You're still here," he whispered, brushing my cheek with the back of his hand, "but your glow is different. Like the sun just dipped behind a cloud." I laughed it off. "I'm probably just tired. Too much coffee, too little sleep." But I knew something wasn't right. I could feel myself slipping. At first, it was small things, forgetting words mid-sentence, zoning out during client calls, staring at a blank page for hours with a brush in my hand and nothing inside me moving. I'd catch myself standing in the middle of a room, not knowing why I was there. I didn't tell him. Not at first. I didn't want to scare him. But Elijah wasn't stupid. He noticed. He started waking up in the middle of the night, watching me. I could feel his eyes tracing the shape of my back, like he was silently asking the universe to give him answers I wouldn't speak aloud. He began taking days off work to stay with me, bringing tea I never drank, hovering just close enough for comfort, but never close enough to fix it. "I'm okay," I kept saying. "Just stressed." He nodded, but his eyes were full of thunder. Then came the night in the grocery store. I forgot where I was. Just blanked. One second, I was reaching for honey, and the next, I was staring at the floor, breath caught in my throat, heart racing like I was lost in the woods. He found me crouched beside a shelf of canned peaches, shaking. I whispered, "I don't know what's happening to me." He knelt beside me, arms wrapping around me like a shield. "We'll figure it out," he said, over and over, like a mantra. "I've got you. I've got you." After that, we stopped pretending. Doctors. Tests. Long waits in quiet rooms with posters about neurological disorders and autoimmune symptoms. They called it idiopathic cognitive fade, which was a fancy way of saying, "You're slipping away, and we don't know why." No cure. No real treatment. Just slow disappearance. It wasn't fatal. Not technically. But parts of me were vanishing. The parts that painted, dreamed, joked, remembered. The parts he fell in love with. That's when the real pain began. It wasn't the sickness. It was watching him try to hold on to someone he couldn't stop from fading. He started keeping a journal, not for himself, but for me. Every little thing I forgot, he wrote down. The way I liked my coffee. My favorite lines from old movies. The story of how we met, written in his voice, like he was trying to preserve me in ink. "Maybe one day," he said, placing the journal on my pillow, "you'll find your way back to yourself." But I wasn't just fading, I was becoming unreachable. I'd get frustrated and snap at him, push him away, insist on being alone even when I didn't mean it. And sometimes, I saw it in his face, that flicker of fear, the helplessness. One night, during dinner, I spilled water all over the table and burst into tears. Not because of the mess, but because I couldn't remember how to set the table properly. A fork was in the wrong spot, and it felt like the whole world was out of order. "I'm broken, Elijah," I sobbed. "Why are you still here?" He didn't speak. He just came around the table, knelt beside me, and held me like I was the only thing left worth saving. But I saw it. The crack forming in him. The man who used to hum while he cooked, who filled a room with light, was starting to dim. We both were. And then, one morning, I forgot his name. He smiled through it. Said it didn't matter. That he'd remind me 1,000 times if he had to. But after he kissed my forehead and walked into the bathroom, I heard it, the sob, strangled and low, like something inside him had finally broken loose. And that's when I realized. It wasn't just me who was losing myself. He was losing us. And no one could stop it. The man I loved stopped singing. At first, it was subtle. He didn't hum in the mornings anymore. The speakers in the kitchen went quiet. Our playlists, the ones we made together, gathered dust inside his phone, unplayed. He said nothing. That was the hardest part. Not the silence itself, but what it covered. There was a stillness in Elijah now. Not peaceful, but haunted. Like he was holding something heavy in his chest and trying not to let it fall. He still made my tea every morning, still walked me to the couch and draped my favorite blanket across my knees. He smiled when I looked at him. But it didn't reach his eyes. It was like watching a painting fade. Same shape. Different soul. I began to wonder who was disappearing faster, me, or him. I once asked him, quietly, "Are you okay?" He paused. Something flickered in his gaze, raw, bare. But all he said was, "Don't worry about me." But I did worry. How could I not? Because while I was fading in fragments, Elijah was crumbling all at once. I found him one night in the garage, sitting in the dark with his sketchbooks open and untouched. pages and pages of half-drawn designs, buildings without foundations, lines that never connected. "I haven't drawn in weeks," he said, without looking up. "I forget why I used to." I stood in the doorway, watching him, the man who once breathed life into everything he touched now struggling to find color in the world. "Elijah," I whispered, "you're allowed to break." He didn't move. He just said, "Not while you need me." But I saw the truth. I saw the wear on his face, the weight of carrying both of us. He was keeping the world spinning alone. His friends started calling less. He stopped replying. Stopped going to work. Our fridge was always half empty. The plants died. He didn't notice. His whole life had become me, every breath, every decision orbiting around what I needed, what I forgot, what I couldn't do anymore. And he never once asked for anything back. Some nights, I'd wake to find him on the floor next to our bed, hands pressed to his face, shaking, not from grief, but from holding too much for too long. I tried to reach him. I tried. But the more I reached, the farther he slipped. And still, he never left. One day, I was having a good moment. Clearer than usual. I remembered something simple, the way he takes his coffee. 2 sugars. Dash of cinnamon. I made it for him before he even woke up. He stared at the mug like it was a miracle. I said, "I don't want to be the reason you fall apart." He looked at me then, really looked. His voice cracked when he said, "You're not. You're the only reason I'm still standing." I wanted to tell him to run. To save himself. But I didn't. Because I needed him. And that truth, cut deeper than anything. The worst part wasn't watching him unravel. It was knowing I was the one pulling the thread. I watched the man who once carried the world in his smile become a ghost in his own life, but his love never faded. If anything, it got stronger. Quieter, yes. But deeper. Woven into every tiny gesture. Every breath he took around me. He was unraveling. But he never let go. He was choosing me every day, even when it broke him. And that's how I knew it was real. Not because of what he said. But because of the silence he stayed in. Just to keep me warm. Elijah was never the kind of man who looked for trouble. But one morning, I woke up on the couch, disoriented, and he was already dressed, not in sweats or his usual hoodie, but in jeans and a dark button-up. His keys were in his hand. His jaw was tight. "Where are you going?" I asked, voice still rough from sleep. He looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something behind his eyes besides exhaustion, resolve. "To ask questions," he said. "Real ones." I didn't understand then. Not fully. But something in him had snapped, not out of anger, but desperation. Because what was happening to me didn't make sense. My symptoms didn't follow a pattern. My scans were clean, then unclear. One specialist blamed early-onset dementia. Another thought it was trauma-related dissociation. But none of it fit. And Elijah, he couldn't sit in the unknown anymore. He went back through every test, every visit, every referral we'd received. He started asking for second opinions. Third. He called labs, demanded rechecks, demanded answers. When a neurologist brushed him off with a cold, clinical tone, he slammed the door on his way out, something so unlike him, it made my heart ache and swell at the same time. He was fighting now. With everything he had left. I'd catch him reading medical journals at 2 a.m., surrounded by sticky notes and highlighted pages. He had turned our dining table into a war map of my life. Then came the phone call. And everything changed. Elijah picked up on the second ring. I only heard his side of the conversation, but I knew. I knew. His voice went flat. Then cold. Then quiet. "What do you mean?" A pause. How long have you known? Another pause. You weren't going to tell her. When he hung up, he didn't speak for a long time. Elijah, I asked, heart racing, what was it? What did they say? He sat down across from me, hands trembling. It's not idiopathic, he said. It's not just fading. He swallowed hard, like the truth was a stone in his throat. You were exposed to something chemical. Months ago. The kind of thing that doesn't show up unless you're looking for it. A neurotoxin. Slow, targeted. Manufactured. I blinked. What are you saying? I'm saying this was done to you. His voice cracked. On purpose. It didn't make sense. None of it did. But he showed me the papers. The exposure signs. The cross-referenced symptoms. My immune collapse. The hospital that had misreported my toxicology screen, the same hospital with ties to a pharmaceutical lab where I'd done freelance illustration for a brief time, designing labels for experimental drug trials I never fully understood. I felt cold. Like the air had been sucked out of the room. They buried it, he said. They're trying to make it disappear. Just like you. Suddenly, everything that felt like chaos had a shape, and it was intentional. Elijah, what are you going to do? He looked at me, jaw clenched, and I saw something in him I'd never seen before, fury. Not rage. But a focused, burning will. I'm going to bring it to light. And just like that, he wasn't just the man trying to save me anymore. He was becoming someone else entirely. He reached out, touched my face, and said, I'm not losing you because someone decided you didn't matter. Not like this. In the days that followed, Elijah became a storm. He gathered everything. Documents. Witnesses. Old emails. He tracked people down, even someone who used to work inside the lab. He pieced together what no doctor had, that my exposure was no accident. It was negligence. Covered up. Ignored. He wasn't sleeping. He barely ate. But he moved. With fire in his chest. With love in his bones. And all I could do was watch. He was fighting for me, louder than I could, stronger than I knew how. But I also knew. The deeper he went into this, the more it took from him. He was uncovering the truth. But it was costing him everything. There was a day, months after the investigation began, when I looked at Elijah and didn't recognize him. Not because I'd forgotten his face. But because he had changed. His hair was longer now, curled just over his ears in soft waves he no longer tried to tame. There were shadows under his eyes that no amount of sleep could soften. His body was leaner, like he was slowly burning through himself to keep moving. And his smile, once effortless, boyish, was now something rare. And quiet. And earned. But it was his eyes that haunted me most. They held a kind of gravity now. Like he'd seen too much. He had become a man forged by necessity. One who no longer waited for justice, but dragged it into the light. The documents he uncovered had sparked something bigger than either of us. A legal battle. A whistleblower. A small storm in the medical world. But justice is slow. And complicated. And by the time the courts began to circle the case, Elijah was already someone else entirely. Gone was the architect who dreamed in lines and space. He barely stepped into his studio anymore. I can't design buildings, he said one night, while the one person I love is collapsing right in front of me. And it wasn't just his work he sacrificed. He'd lost friends, people who didn't understand why he wouldn't let go. He stopped answering family texts that said, "You need to take care of yourself too." Because he was taking care of himself. He was taking care of me. I tried to tell him he didn't have to. That I didn't want to be the reason he lost everything. But he just looked at me, eyes filled with a kind of brutal tenderness, and said, I didn't lose anything that mattered. And I believed him. But I also knew I'd changed him. The man who once danced in our tiny living room now moved with weight in his limbs. The one who used to whisper poetry in bed now read court affidavits aloud over coffee. There were moments, late at night, when he thought I was asleep, where I'd catch him sitting at the edge of the bed, hands in his hair, breathing like someone trying to hold the whole world in their lungs. This man had carried me through hell. But he'd been burned too. And still, he loved me. Not with fireworks or grand gestures. But with presence. With 1,000 quiet decisions every day, to stay, to fight, to protect, to endure. Love had reshaped him. And not all of it was beautiful. He was harder now. Sharper. Less patient with the world. But more patient with me. There were days I didn't speak. Days I forgot who I was for hours. Days I screamed and cried and slammed doors because my own mind was turning against me. And he stayed. He always stayed. One day, I asked him, why? Why do you keep holding on when I'm not even me anymore? He didn't answer at first. He just leaned in, resting his forehead against mine. And after a long breath, he whispered. Because I remember who you are, even when you don't. That moment broke me. Not because it was sad. But because it was true. I realized then, he hadn't just fought for justice. He had fought for my memory. For every piece of me slipping through the cracks. And he carried them all, every fragment, like treasure. I don't think Elijah ever meant to become this man. But love doesn't ask for permission to change us. It just does. And in saving me, he'd lost parts of himself. But the man he became? He was stronger. Quieter. More dangerous to anyone who tried to take what he loved. And in the middle of that storm, in the wreckage of who we once were, he looked at me like I was still the sun. Even when I couldn't find my own light. There's a quiet that comes after long grief. Not silence, not really. But something softer. Something that hums beneath the surface, like a melody you can't quite name. That's where we live now. Somewhere between memory and surrender. It's been 2 years since I started slipping. I don't paint anymore. Some days, I don't speak. Others, I speak in fragments, half-formed thoughts that never find their shape. But Elijah, he listens like every word is a map back to who I was. He reads to me every night. Sometimes it's from our journal, the one he started when my mind began to unravel. Sometimes it's the notes I used to leave in his lunchbox. Sometimes it's just his own voice, telling me stories I've heard 100 times but always feel brand new. Like how we met in the rain. Or how he knew he loved me the moment I said, "You're not as charming as you think." He tells those stories like prayers. And some days, only some, I remember. I remember the sound of his laugh. The way his fingers curl around mine when he thinks I'm asleep. The exact color of the mural I painted in his studio, even though it's been painted over now, replaced by blueprints and documents and quiet. We never got justice. Not the way he hoped. The pharmaceutical company paid a settlement. Silent. Cold. No admission of wrongdoing. A sealed statement. No courtroom. No apology. Just money neither of us ever touched. Because how do you buy back a life? He told me once, if I had to choose between watching you disappear, or forgetting you ever existed, I'd choose the pain. Every time. That's what love became for us. Not a fairy tale. Not a cure. But a choice. Every day. In every breath. He became my anchor. My memory keeper. The man who stayed even when staying meant heartbreak on repeat. And me? I became the place where love hurts. Where it shows its scars. Where it bleeds. Where it holds on anyway. There's a photo of us on the mantel. One I barely remember taking. We're wrapped in a blanket on the fire escape, our foreheads touching, city lights blurred behind us like stars underwater. He looks at it every morning before making breakfast. And even now, even in this version of me, I sometimes catch myself watching him, and I feel it. Not with logic. Not with memory. But with something deeper. Something wordless and ancient and true. And in those rare moments, I whisper, just loud enough for him to hear. I remember you. And his hands shake. And his eyes close. And he smiles like the world is still worth surviving. Because this is where love hurts. Not in betrayal. Not in endings. But in the beautiful, unbearable act of staying. Even when the person you love is no longer fully there. Even when hope is small and fragile and fading. Even then, love remains. Like breath. Like light. Like him. Always him. Even in the quiet where everything else disappears. I still find him.